record. So welcome everybody to Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. This is our October meeting, and today we have a special guest joining us, and she's going to be talking to us about climate science. We're very excited to have her here today with us. As I mentioned before, this is a group of doctors, nurses, and we also welcome medical students, nursing students, and other interested folks, health professionals and future health professionals to join us in learning about climate change and advocating for climate action. So bear with me a moment here while I just admit a few more folks to the meeting. So as I mentioned, my name is Melissa Baldwin, and Florida Clinicians for Climate Action is a group of health professionals who are concerned about the health impacts of climate change and wanting to take action to advocate for equitable solutions. And so we engage health professionals to learn about the health harms of climate and then advocate for equitable policies. We have a few more folks joining. So if you're just joining, please put your name in the chat as well as your area of expertise and the city that you're joining us from, so we all know who is here with us today. And I know you're probably as tired as I am after a long day of possibly many Zoom meetings, but if you're willing, I encourage you to turn on your video just for a minute and say hi. It's nice to see everybody. I'm really excited to have you all here today. We believe that health professionals have an incredible power to use their voice to advocate for climate action, and that's why we engage health professionals to learn about climate and speak out for equitable policies. And so, there we go, I'm just admitting a few more people. So as you're joining us, go ahead and click through to our agenda. The first thing we're going to do is welcome and introductions, and let's see here. I've got, how many people? We have 19. We probably have too many people to have everyone introduce themselves. So what I'm going to do is just have you put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. And I'm going to move straight on to announcements. I want to encourage you to make sure that you have joined FCCA as a member by clicking on our website, that's floridaclinicians.org, and fill out that join form so that we can keep you informed on future opportunities. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook. That's a great way to stay in touch and just see some of the latest news that we have. There's always an article in the news or a new report that's being released or some new information that's coming out, and Facebook is generally the most up-to-date. So I encourage you to like us on Facebook. And I'd like to start by just acknowledging one of our members, Dr. Anna Lizama Clark. So as I mentioned to you, what we try to do is work with clinicians to help you enhance your climate literacy so that you can grow your confidence in understanding and talking about the ways that climate affects health, and really emphasizing that to the public. And so I'm very thankful to Dr. Clark, because at last minute's notice she was able to jump on a press conference for us with one of our partners, the CLIO Institute. The CLIO Institute is an educational group based in Miami. Some of you might have heard of them, and they had a really interesting campaign on heat. And so I want to share with you a wonderful news clip that Anna participated in. So I'm going to share, actually, okay, can everyone see me?
Morgan & Morgan is not only America's largest injury law firm, we're also a local law firm with branch offices right here in your community. We're here for you, wherever you are, whatever.
Okay, sorry. Is everyone with me? So Dr. Lizama Clark, do you want to say anything, just how you felt doing that, or maybe encourage other people, or even just share your own experience and maybe why you wanted to get involved with FCCA?
It was short notice, but I had like a script, and you helped me narrow it down. You know, we didn't need to be more in depth or anything, and it went. I didn't realize that they were going to use my segment as much as they did, but they did, the medical part of it.
Well, that underscores the fact that health professionals are the most trusted voices in America. The #1 most trusted professional is a nurse, followed by doctors and pharmacists, more trusted than politicians, or I believe other fields. And so that's why it's so important for health professionals to come to the table and to speak out about climate change, because it is such a crucial threat to our health and to our future. So, and that's the type of activity that we want our members to engage in. And it, like I said, you don't have to do a TV interview if you don't want to. You could participate in one of our committees. We have wonderful work happening in our education committees, and some work being done by students, as well as our advocacy committee. There's really just a lot of different ways that you can get involved, but I wanted to highlight that just because I thought that you did such a great job with it. So thank you so much, Dr. Lizama Clark.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to go back to my agenda here. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I really encourage you to make sure you sign up as a member. Membership is free, and it just means that we have your information and we can send you updates when we have an opportunity for you to act on. I'm going to admit someone else to this meeting. And I do have 2 requests. I'm not sure if there's anybody on this call who fits this bill, but we were contacted by a group in Tallahassee. They're wanting to do a leaf burning ordinance. And so they're looking for a pulmonologist to speak to, or an asthma and allergy specialist to speak about the harmful health effects from burning. So think about that. And then we're also seeking a clinician from Pinellas County. There's an opportunity to present in front of the Florida Association of Counties Urban Caucus in December. So I'm looking for somebody to help me with that as well. So if you're interested in either of those opportunities, please just email me. My email is provided in the agenda. And then moving on to a really exciting new development. The United States House of Representatives Select Committee on the Climate Crisis just released a huge new report specific to Florida that outlines the health benefits of staying in the Paris Agreement. This is really exciting development because the information is so local. And so I provided a link to that new Florida report in the agenda, as well as some of the top numbers. Over 100,000 deaths can be avoided, and nearly $750 billion can be saved from the health benefits from switching to clean energy away from dirty energy. And that's another one of our key messages, is that climate solutions are health solutions. So when we change from dirty, polluting fossil fuels to cleaner energy, we have cleaner air that's better for our heart and lungs. When we eat healthier food and more plant-based diet, that's better for climate, it's better for our bodies. There's just so many ways that climate solutions are health solutions as well. So let me just stop there and see if there's any questions. No? Okay, I'm going to keep going. A couple important announcements. We have, please save the date for the annual FCCA and COB Climate Health and Equity Symposium. This is going to be a 4 to 6 hour CME program on climate health and equity. That'll be on January 23rd. Also, if you're new to climate and health and you want to learn more, we have like a very basic climate and health 101 class that we're going to be giving. We're teaming up with the local union, the Health Professionals Union at Jackson, and that will be on October 28th. And another one of our partners, Clio, who was mentioned in that press event, has a wonderful annual meeting that they do, empowering capable climate communicators. Their 2020 Climate and Health Symposium is coming up in November. So lots going on, lots of opportunities to learn and get involved. And now I'd like to transition to our featured speaker. Today, we're very lucky to have a scientist with us from the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is a wonderful group that puts out a lot of really great reports. In fact, that media clip that you saw referenced some of the data from their Killer Heat report. So I'd like to introduce Brenda Ekwurzel. She is a senior climate scientist and the director of climate science for the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And Brenda, I was hoping that we could have kind of a conversation. I have a couple questions I want to ask you. I know you have some slides that you want to share, so you're welcome to do that. But first, I wanted to just start by asking you what we have learned about climate science over the years. So I'll admit, I'm getting old now. I'm 30, 39. Some people, the students on here, I think will consider that old, and maybe some others won't. But I learned about climate in 1999. And back then, I used to say, we can never point to a single weather event and say it was caused by global warming, but we could say that it's consistent with what scientists expect. And so now I understand that science is really evolving. So my first question to you is, can we blame a specific weather event like a flood or hurricane on global warming?
Thank you so much, Melissa, for inviting me, and also to my colleague, Alicia Reyes, who also made it possible for me to be here with all of you. And I really am so glad, because the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action just is really an inspiring gathering. So, and group, and all the work that you're doing, especially that clip, Dr. Clark, that was wonderful to see. So the question is, could we, quote unquote, blame an extreme event on climate change? The answer is, we used to have trouble with that, and science has really advanced. We've detected that there has been change in the major hurricanes, for example, extreme heat waves, and other actions, and we can figure out how much climate change is playing a role. So there's a two-part answer. I can give you the big overview of the aspects that are affecting health, or I could zoom right in on the hurricanes. I'll let you, Melissa, and others say, which do you want to hear first, about the hurricanes, or do you want to hear about the overall with the different health?
Let's do hurricanes first. That's a topic
Right,
that's
I'll
still
jump
timely.
to those slides then. Okay, hurricanes. So we're getting right into the heat of the most cutting edge latest science. This is a screen capture from a blog by Jeff Masters, and he is now blogging over at Yale Climate Connections. And I just wanted to show you that, I mean, seriously, this is an image from September 14th, 2020. We got Sally, Paulette, Renee, Vicky, Teddy. And you might ask, why are there so many hurricanes, tropical storms, tropical cyclones churning in the Atlantic? Now, I will tell you that people will tell you that overall around the world, we tend to have the same number of these storms, tropical cyclones, they're officially called, happening. But the number doesn't matter. What is changing with climate change is that the major hurricanes, or they're called different names in other basins like typhoons in the Pacific, those are becoming more numerous. So when it happens and they're able to form, they're more likely to be more damaging. So another thing, I'm going to use a bad analogy here, because Melissa, you mentioned something about what causes us to sweat. Well, I think of hurricanes as the tropical ocean sweating. Now, we know in the summer we want to cool off, or all year round in Florida, sometimes in the heat of the day, you might want to cool off and you sweat. Well, the ocean does this. It tries to transfer that heat that's too hot in the summer. It wants to get that heat to the poles. And because of the way the summer conditions are, one of the most effective ways is to form a tropical cyclone and send a lot of heat towards the polar regions. So the warming oceans are directly linked to human-driven climate change. And another factor is that the rain associated with it is highly correlated with increased intensity with climate change. So scientists are zeroing in on the intensity of the precipitation, as well as one other factor. Sea level rise means that the elevation of the storm surge may be coming in on higher waters than if the storm happened a century ago. So I'm going to show you the latest climate science with a very famous storm that happened in the Gulf. And let's go there. So what it is Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, and some of the initial science said that it was 3 times more likely to be dropping the amount of precipitation that it did. It was a historic kind of event. So this is a picture of homes. You can see how high the inundation happened. Here's another study that said global warming made the precipitation about 15%. So it was a range of 8 to 19% in this study, more intense. That was published soon after Hurricane Harvey. Another study looking at Hurricane Harvey said the increase in observed precipitation and the accumulations during Hurricane Harvey in the most affected areas of Houston, so it's really zooming in on the most damaging part, was made more intense by a factor of 3.5. So economists are looking at this, but let's remember that these are people's lives, and from a public health standpoint, there were lives lost during this tragic storm. So economists are paying attention, and they put numbers on this, and I wouldn't pay too much attention to the total value, but this is what attribution science is looking at. What are the parts of this hurricane that could be attributable to climate change? So there's two factors. You look at the science, and here's a table that don't look at the numbers. It just look, there's three studies that are being compared, and the vertical columns are looking at, remember I said the Ritzner and Wenner study, about 3.5 times worse than if this storm happened in the pre-industrial era. And that's called, that's that first column in the lower estimate. The FAR is fraction of attributable risk. So those are more like percentages. So these studies ranged, let's go over the best estimate column, that Hurricane Harvey precipitation had somewhere between 67 and 90% of that precipitation could be attributed to climate change. This is something to remember. When it's so extreme, it's off the charts. These are the type of things that are not possible in the pre-industrial climate. You just can't get something this bad. So the worse it is, the higher percentages of attribution. So it's an interesting concept. So people put dollar values on this. They look at what NOAA and reinsurance agencies, they look at the damages. So you have numbers of people affected, over 582,000 people with one estimate. And the right column is certainly a concern for public health. You have somewhere between 68 and 88 lives were tragically lost during Hurricane Harvey. So when economists say, okay, what fraction of that? They just take like the lowest percentage in that best estimate column, like 67%, and multiply that by the economic damages and come up with a range of on that left column, direct damages in billions of dollars. They're just taking the science fraction of risk, multiplying by the damages, and coming up with very high billions of dollars just from this one storm. And from a public health standpoint, if you were to do that, it might be a stretch, but it's more than one life. I can definitely say that it's no question that climate change has a role to play in the loss of a life in this tragic storm. Okay, so another area of attribution that I and colleagues from UCS as well as Oxford and the Climate Accountability Institute are also looking at. Another public health aspect is global mean surface temperature. And we looked at the 90 largest fossil fuel companies, and about 42 to 50% of the global mean surface temperature rise since 1880 to 2010 can be just traced back to the extractions and sale of the product of 90 companies.
Oh, can I stop you there? Because I think this is a really important point. That often when we talk about climate or we advocate for action on climate, some of the pushback is that people feel like they don't want to take on the guilt of, oh, it's my fault because I'm driving a car, I live in my house. But I think that this point that there is a group of polluters that are responsible for a lot of these damages. I think it takes away, I think it helps us to encourage more people to be receptive to action if they realize that it's not necessarily that we need them to change their ways, it's that we need to hold polluters accountable. So keep going. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you. No, that's a good point, because part of the reason we did this study is this is buried in climate assessments all the time when we say human activities, all human activities, and they all play a role. However, when you look at the activities that are most contributing and you just zero in on those, you can see from a policy standpoint, okay, well, let's pay attention to those activities and figure out how can we find better ways of generating energy or things like that that aren't as harmful for human health.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just to put that in perspective, these are, so you think about Florida, extreme heat in Florida, and in the United States, just to put it in a global perspective, Melissa opened with talking about that report that talks about, is it worth being in the Paris Agreement, or if we go along a high emission scenario. The upper panel is the difference in excess mortality in the change in North America. Over the right, those right columns are towards the end of the century is the rightmost bar chart, but the leftmost set of columns is the low emissions Paris Agreement. The middle set is a little bit above the Paris Agreement. And the right series of columns is the high emissions scenario. And you see that's where we have bigger excess mortality. And you have some cold mortality, but you have much higher heat stress. So you end up having a net loss of life with further climate change. And it's worse in Southeast Asia and Southern Europe. Okay, so we'll get back to this. You wanted to know about extreme events, but I imagine you were also wanting to talk about just other aspects of public health. So yeah. I jumped right to the punchline of attributions. That might be a bit much.
No, it's okay. I just think it's important to recognize that the science has evolved and it's gotten better. It's gotten stronger. And because the signals of climate change are so loud and clear now, that we can really make direct attributions. And I think that helps empower us as professionals and advocates as we seek policy change. So the other question that I wanted to ask you about is the health impacts of all of the rollbacks. So we know that the Trump administration has reversed a lot of significant EPA policies. And I wondered if you could just give us maybe a few examples or talk a little bit about the health impacts of some of the environmental protections that have been rolled back in the last 4 years.
Sure. Well, we just had just this past summer a rollback of the methane restrictions on methane emissions from oil and gas operations. And so that the volatile organic carbon that comes from that is also a precursor emission that on sunny and hot days you can create ground level smog or ozone, which has a burden for human health and asthma risk and hospital visits and so forth. Or people having to lose work days if their children are having to be home from school to be safe. And as we know, this is from the Fourth National Climate Assessment, there's an unequal burden when these type of measures are rolled back. Another thing that was rolled back from over the last 4 years was something called the Clean Power Plan, reducing emissions from power plants. And this, again, people who are unfortunately living close to these toxic sites that are emitting pollutants, these can affect public health unequally. Communities of color, children, older adults, if you have socioeconomic risks of lower income, these all can be cumulative. And I'm speaking to folks who know much better than I all of the public health outcomes. However, I did have a chance to work on the Fourth National Climate Assessment, and we worked on this chapter, reducing risks through emissions mitigation. And don't worry about this big table. We consider this like trying to distill all that we were trying to say. So look at I'm just going to highlight in a red box all the things we were looking at that if we did the high emission scenario versus if we did a little bit higher than the Paris Agreement in terms of emissions, how much you would avoid in damages. And these are people's lives and so forth. So I'm going to put in red the ones that are related to health. So labor, lost work hours is directly related to outdoor work in extreme heat and situations like that. And it's the top impact. And if we did, instead of high emissions, we did the Paris Agreement, and we went a little bit past that, we could reduce that by 48%. The second highest is extreme temperature mortality. Look at air quality. We also have inland flooding, where you can have loss of life, black mold, affecting people's basements and their health, water quality, West Nile virus, harmful algal blooms, something you know a lot about in Florida. This is a serious, serious issue. Shellfish, agriculture, the food we are able to grow and having less nutrition under further climate change, aeroallergens, the smoke from wildfires. There are so many aspects of this, and including mortality from coastal property. Coastal property is an economic measure, but really lives can be lost during some of these extreme flooding events from coastal storms. So public health is one of the biggest, highest costs in terms of lives lost, it's a drag on the health infrastructure. It is such a big part of climate change. It's often the untold story, and that is often really, really important to have people tell that story. Those of us who are climate scientists, we talk too much about sometimes the extreme events. I think the public health story is not getting out there enough, so I'm so glad you all are trying to help with that. So here is the top labor. If we were to not go on the high emissions pathway and instead be a little bit worse than the Paris Agreement, you could reduce those damages by nearly half. So that's really important. For extreme temperature mortality, again, if you were to do the Paris Agreement, and it's just a little bit higher, we could take a chunk and avoid damages around nearly 60%. So global emissions reductions help human health right in Florida. So this is work that my colleagues at Union Concerned Scientists worked on. It's called the Killer Heat Report, and there's a peer-reviewed publication. And we were looking at different thresholds. So outdoor workers above 90, heat index above 100 for sensitive populations, heat index above 105, all of us really suffer. And when it's off the charts, some of these places in the US, it goes off the charts. The National Weather Service can't even calculate heat index. So where does Florida sit in this? Let's look at 100 degrees. That's for sensitive populations, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Look at the average number of days. If we did no action, if we did not do the Paris Agreement, Florida would have more than between 100 and 200 days above 100 Fahrenheit. And the Killer Heat Report on that URL at the bottom, you can look at your location, your county, your city, and get more exact days. And it's really worth exploring. However, if we did take action and try to stick to the Paris Agreement, you can see that Florida gets much more manageable, much less of a strain on the public health infrastructure, people needing to go in and have extreme heat mitigation in the public health sector. Also, Florida workers would lose hours, outdoor work, especially under the high emissions scenario. And look at Florida. It is one of the worst in the nation as far as being an outdoor worker. Can you imagine what the world would look like unless we did do the Paris Agreement? This is kind of an image of that kind of drag on the economy, as well as the opportunities for workers who have to work outside.
Well, that's really incredible. My husband is an outdoor worker. He's an underwater welder, and he's always outside, either in a conics or on a boat in the heat all the time. And he's had colleagues who have had heat stress and near heat had, so it definitely hits home. And Florida's economy, the pillars of Florida's economy, agriculture, real estate development, tourism, they're all threatened by extreme heat. And so there's so many reasons. And like you said, that health conversation is a wonderful way for us to bring it back and show people that this isn't a future problem or a faraway problem. This is a here and now problem. I want to open it up to all of our participants. If you have any questions about any of that material, or if you have any questions about climate science in general, or if you even just want to say hi and why you're interested in this, or any ideas you have, I'd love to have like an open conversation now. So does anyone want to go ahead and turn on your video if you like? We'd love to see your faces. I'd love to hear from our participants here and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts to share. And I don't see any questions in the chat. I will say that we are planning for the January COB Symposium, we are planning to do a deep dive on heat and looking at all the different ways that heat affects vulnerable populations. So looking at pregnant women, looking at outdoor workers. And so I think this is really an important concept. Is there anybody has any questions or thoughts or reactions? Don't all go at once.
I have some good news for.
Okay, what is it?
Okay. So the positive policy other countries have adopted that you would recommend. Yes. There are amazing options for example, many people are focusing on reducing the emissions from trying to figure out how to get electrification of end use, and trying to figure out how do you increase the efficiency of buildings and building processes. And so some communities are really taking a focus on that because that propagates up the chain. No matter how you generate your energy, if you increase end use efficiencies, then, and you have standards in place, sometimes these things that don't sound big or economy wide, but just having engineering standards for making something that people use in their everyday lives or an industry that can be more efficient, then everyone saves. There are also aspects that was pretty amazing in that there are countries that are investing in research and development to try to incentivize better alternatives. For example, people are making advances in building materials. Cement manufacturing emits a lot of carbon dioxide, and we, as we build and we use cement, people are working in doing innovation with how do we make lower emission cement and materials. And some people are trying to figure out how do we create policies to increase the cleaner energy generation in a way that is lower cost. And so many countries, I'd have to say, have invested in trying to scale up energy production that is renewable, for example, and have brought down the cost. And those countries that invested early in those really are selling a lot of those innovations to the rest of the world, but it has brought down costs for everyone. So a lot of people are benefiting, and that's why today a lot of renewable energy projects are cheaper in generating per kilowatt hour than some of the coal and other ways of generating electricity. So it's making economic sense. So those type of investments in innovation, as well as, let's see, recent fish kill in northern Biscayne Bay was due to water being too hot or fertilizer runoff. Melissa, do you know about
it's both. My understanding is both. So that was originally cited as that it was warm water. It was a loss of oxygen. My understanding is there was a loss of oxygen in the water. And some of the original stories talked about the water just being too warm. And then they did further studies in water quality samples, and they found that that nutrient pollution from stormwater runoff was also another reason for the water quality and the fish kill. And maybe you'll agree with me, Brenda, but both of those things are related to climate, right? Because more rain and warmer water.
So if you have warmer water, it cannot hold the dissolved oxygen that the fish desperately need in it. It outgasses. And also there's oxygen from the atmosphere goes in, all the gases go from the atmosphere into the ocean. So not only does the oxygen go in, but also the carbon dioxide. So you're acidifying the waters off of Florida as well. So you have the runoff, intense precipitation running off nutrients, which we've over fertilized our agricultural lands. And that extra runoff also, surprisingly, also brings more acidic water with it, and turbidity. So all of these can really mess up fisheries, especially creating low oxygen zones in the summer because of the hot water. It really can go, the loss of oxygen, plus you have a lot more life down there. So they're consuming the oxygen, and they can consume so much that they run out of the oxygen that's in the water itself. And if the water is stagnant, it's not turning over as much. So those are big Gulf of Mexico anoxic zone, and also in different bays and estuaries, you can get that effect. So climate change, and that's the part about attribution we're not doing a good job, is the double, triple, and quadruple whammies that when it converges, like in the Biscayne Bay, who's responsible? Who's contributing to that? What are all the factors? So we have to basically, as policy, look at all the factors and all the different human activities that combine to create that situation in Biscayne Bay.
Mm-hmm. That was helpful. I just learned things from you. I didn't know that. We have another question from Carol Lindsay. How is single-use plastic pollution related to climate change?
Sure. Most plastic traditionally is made from fossil fuel production. Petrochemical industry is a feedstock for a lot of chemical products. Anytime there's chemistry involved, there's a lot of, especially with plastic or carbon, you have lots of times fracking, natural gas, petrochemical industry feedstock for a lot of the products we consume. So a single-use plastic produced by fossil fuel production rather than, say, a biogenic source that's an active part of the carbon cycle, again, puts the Earth out of balance in terms of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere that wouldn't have happened in the annual cycle of life or over 50 years. The active carbon cycle versus the fossil fuel, which was extracted to make that single-use plastic. And of course, it's not great for the oceans because life, and animals can be affected by the breakdown of the products when it's floating in the ocean. So there's that whole side of the story too. So it's better to have products that either avoid single-use plastics and better alternatives. There's another question, I guess. Is it possible to reverse the effects of climate change? Okay, so really quickly, that same thing. If you have a fossil carbon that was basically got its energy from sun thousands and thousands and thousands and millions of years ago, and we burn that, we've now put the Earth out of balance and we trap more heat. The active part of the carbon cycle, a tree taking up that carbon dioxide that was emitted from a fossil fuel, we don't have enough. We can do that with wetlands, mangroves, trees that can live for 800 years, could sequester carbon for more than several centuries. In the case of a wetland, it might be, there are some petrified wood that are Viking ships in wetlands. It's possible to sequester carbon for a while. If we do it and sequester it and use it the next year, like enhanced oil recovery, and that's not really sequestering it long enough to reverse climate change. So you can use the biosphere to do it, and then we don't have enough active living things in the biosphere to do it at the rate that we're putting it out. You would have to use technological means to actively remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And right now that's pretty expensive. But there's going to be innovation in that space, and probably we have to be investing in that as fast as possible too.
There was just a new report that was released, 3 pathways to 350 ppm, pathways to 350 parts per million, and it shows the pathways to get down to safe carbon levels. It includes electrification, decarbonization of electricity, and capturing carbon, There's one more. Oh, energy efficiency. And that's something that you mentioned earlier. And that's actually one of the main things that we advocate for when we have engaged in policy in Florida in the past. We have gotten involved in advocating for stronger energy efficiency goals. Florida has some of the weakest energy efficiency goals in the country. The goal is less than 1% of the utilities profits goes to help low-income people be more efficient in their homes. And so we've been pushing back on that and pushing for stronger efficiency. So there are pathways to make the problem not as bad, you know, and we definitely have to act soon before it's too late because we are running out of time. Are there any other questions? Do you want to add anything to that, Brenda?
Sure, just one thing is that if we were emitting carbon and still exposing local populations to the harms, the public health harms, and then removing the carbon dioxide, you know, that's not getting you ahead as far as everything. So all the things that Melissa said, we have to reduce emissions and how we generate energy and use our activities, which those are available. So you have to get that down to zero and then remove carbon dioxide, because there are active parts of natural sources of carbon that are going to be part of the active carbon cycle. And we've so put the earth out of balance, we have to remove carbon to offset whatever we do emit in any given year. So that's going to be something we have to do really quick. If we were to do the Paris Agreement and save the coral reefs off of Florida, the warm water coral reefs, we would probably have to be deploying a lot of these things within, you know, globally within, say, 10 to 30 years, depending on how well the Earth responds to the changes we're doing, how sensitive it is.
We have one more question from Catherine Toms. What do you think about biofuels?
Well, it's interesting. Biofuels are, a lot of people who worry about biodiversity worry that you would start losing a lot of biodiversity with biofuels. However, there is a role for biofuels in creating an active part of the carbon cycle. We have to also make sure that we can feed people around the world, that we can make sure we're not using arable land that's used for food. And so you have to look at places that might have marginal land or could help with coastal resilience, or other places like flooding along rivers, so riparian zones, and other places where you can have biofuels that would not be taking away from biodiversity or food supply or other ecosystem services. And so there is a role for biofuels. For example, we probably will never get an electric plane. So biofuels are an active part of the carbon cycle that would still allow us to fly planes in the future and not be as harmful as flying fossil fuel, fueled planes.
They're doing research on mustard seed, I think, fuel for jet fuels in Florida. It's actually being done at some of the Florida universities. That's my understanding. There was two more questions, and then I'm gonna move on because I want to make sure we have committee report outs. So how does electricity contribute to climate change?
If electricity is generated by a fossil fuel, a coal power plant, a natural gas power plant, that is something that would contribute to climate change. If we generate electricity in other ways that are not harming the climate or causing massive waste problems, those are ways that you can still have the activities you enjoy and not be warming the planet and ruining public health as much as climate change does.
Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is to start with efficiency first. So we make our homes and our buildings more efficient, we use less, and then we generate that which we do use from clean sources like solar And so I'm going to move on now to just a few announcements. And I wanted to ask Carol if you're still on from our advocacy committee, just to hop on real quick. And I think there's like 1 or 2 things we wanted to share. Thank you so much, Dr. Ekwurzel, for sharing your wisdom with us. It was really awesome having you share your expertise. Thank you. Carol, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yes. Hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much also, ma'am. That was a great presentation. Well, just to mention, tomorrow night we have an advocacy subcommittee meeting from 7 to 8 p.m. It's a Zoom meeting, and we're having a presentation on the burning of sugarcane and how bad it is for the health. And we have one speaker in particular. Her name is Gilda DiCarli, and she's done some investigation. She's an Ida B. Wells Fellow and a journalist. She wrote a story that appeared in Grist in the Miami Herald. We also have Akina Phillips. She's a resident of Glades, and Glades receives the burning air pollution from the fields, and she's going to offer her local perspective. And we have Patrick Ferguson, who is from the Sierra Club, and he's leading the Stop the Burn campaign. So he's going to be on hand to answer questions. So if any of you would like to participate, please feel free to email me, or Melissa, how can they contact?
Yeah, I'll put your email in the chat.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share the invite with you. And then the only other thing is that a couple of us from the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, we're going to be meeting with the Florida Black Legislature caucus next Monday night, where they've allowed us to go to their meeting and do a presentation for 15 minutes so we can tell them what we do, how we're concerned about climate change and its effect on health, and how we can be there as a resource for them. So we're very, very excited about this upcoming meeting. So thank you very much, Melissa, for the time to do the presentation.
Sure, sure. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Questions about FCCA, how you can get involved? No? Two other things I wanted to point out. There's a very powerful story in Atlantic Magazine. I really encourage you to read it. It's called "The World is Getting Hotter and the Divide Between Rich and Poor is Getting Bigger." Some serious equity and justice issues, and just the real impacts of heat and how it's felt disproportionately. And then also there's a great story in Politico about that report. I want to just thank you all for your interest. We are about adding the health voice to the climate debate in Florida, engaging health professionals to learn about climate, enhance your climate literacy, and encourage you to take action in a way that works for you, that feels right for you. And so we want to engage doctors, nurses, medical students, nursing students, health professionals in all fields to learn about climate and join us as we call for action, because we are running out of time. So thank you all so much. That is the conclusion of our meeting, unless anyone else has any questions. No? Okay. All right, I'm gonna close. Thank you so much. I'm gonna save some of these chats and then tend to my small children.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you for joining. All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Ekwurzel. Thank you so much. I hope I'm pronouncing your. I'm sorry.
They do so, yeah. Let me.
Thank you.
I am like brain dead, so that's why I don't look at the screen, because I've been looking at the screen all day long, you know, with the student at OSCE, so I'm really tired.
That's okay. It's totally fine. It's good to see you. You have, I know, I have Zoom fatigue too. It's a real thing.
Okay, good night.
Thank you. Okay, have a good night. Bye-bye.